Welcome to Lexivia English. Ready to take your English to the next level? Here we learn through stories, slow, clear, and fun. So sit back, listen carefully, and enjoy the journey.
Chapter 1. The Day the Earth Flattened. On a quiet Wednesday morning, the world woke up to the most impossible news in human history. Every television station, every radio broadcast, every news website carried the same shocking message. All the world's mountains had vanished overnight. The Himalayas, the Alps, the Rockies, the Andes, gone. Where Mount Everest had stood just yesterday, there was now flat land stretching to the horizon. Scientists around the globe stared at their instruments in disbelief. Satellite images showed a planet transformed, where mighty mountain ranges had defined continents for millions of years. There were now gentle plains and rolling hills. The Earth's surface had somehow smoothed itself out, as if a giant hand had pressed down on every peak and ridge. At first, there was panic. People living in mountain towns found themselves suddenly at sea level. Ski resorts became empty fields. Mountain climbers who had planned expeditions found their dreams literally flattened. But as the initial shock wore off, humanity began to realize something extraordinary. The world had just become much larger and much more accessible. Chapter 2. Rivers Run Wild. The disappearance of mountains triggered changes that nobody had expected. Rivers that had flowed down mountain slopes for thousands of years suddenly had nowhere to go. The mighty Amazon, which had started high in the Andes, now began from a small spring in what used to be Peru, but without mountains to guide its path. The river spread wide across the flat landscape, creating vast new wetlands and lakes. In Europe, the Rhine River, no longer contained by mountain valleys, split into dozens of smaller streams that wandered across the continent like lost children. Some of these new waterways created beautiful oasis-like areas in places that had been deserts. The Sahara Desert, no longer blocked from ocean moisture by the Atlas Mountains, began to receive regular rainfall for the first time in centuries. Green grass started growing in the sand. However, other areas faced serious problems. Cities that had been built in mountain valleys, protected from floods, now found themselves underwater as rivers spread and changed course. Millions of people had to leave their homes and find new places to live on this flatter earth. Chapter 3. Weather gone crazy. Without mountains to block and direct the wind, the world's weather patterns completely changed. Storms that used to be stopped by mountain ranges now traveled freely across continents. A hurricane that started in the Atlantic Ocean could now sweep across what used to be the Rocky Mountains and continue all the way to the Pacific Ocean without anything to slow it down. The changes created some wonderful surprises. Areas that had been cold and dry because mountains blocked warm, moist air suddenly became tropical paradises. Former desert regions bloomed with flowers and trees as rain clouds could finally reach them. A place that used to be called Death Valley became a lush garden filled with life. But the weather changes also brought disasters. Some coastal areas, no longer protected by mountain barriers, were hit by storms more powerful than any in recorded history. Farmers around the world watched their crops fail as the predictable weather patterns their families had known for generations suddenly became unpredictable and wild. Chapter 4. The Great Migration. With mountains no longer blocking travel, humanity began the largest migration in its history. People who had lived their entire lives in isolated mountain valleys suddenly found themselves connected to the rest of the world by flat, easy paths. Tribes that had been separated for thousands of years by impassable peaks could now walk to visit each other in just a few days. The economic effects were dramatic. A farmer in what used to be Tibet could now easily transport goods to markets that had previously been unreachable. Mining operations that had been impossible in steep mountain terrain could now access mineral deposits that lay beneath the flattened earth. New cities sprouted up in areas that had never been suitable for large populations. Transportation companies rushed to build new roads and railways across routes that had been impossible before. A high-speed train could now travel from London to Beijing in a straight line, with no mountains to tunnel through or climb over. Air travel became cheaper and faster, as pilots no longer had to navigate around high peaks or deal with dangerous mountain weather. Chapter 5: Lost Wonders. As the world adapted to its new flat reality, people began to mourn what had been lost. The breathtaking views from mountain peaks existed now only in photographs and memories. Entire ecosystems that had evolved over millions of years in high-altitude environments were gone forever. The snow leopard, the mountain goat, and countless species of alpine plants simply had no home anymore. Mountain cultures that had developed unique traditions, languages, and ways of life over centuries found themselves scattered. The Sherpa people of the Himalayas, who had built their identity around guiding climbers up Everest, had to find completely new purposes in life. The beautiful mountain villages of Switzerland, once famous for their stunning locations, now sat in ordinary fields. Religious sites that had been considered sacred for thousands of years, mountain temples, monastery retreats, and holy peaks were simply gone. Pilgrims who had travelled from around the world to reach these spiritual places found empty ground where their destinations had once stood. It felt like losing pieces of humanity's soul. Chapter 6: New Challenges. The flattened Earth created problems that no one had anticipated. Without mountains to provide natural borders, disputes arose over territory. Countries that had used mountain ranges to define their boundaries suddenly found themselves arguing over where one nation ended and another began. The flat landscape offered no obvious markers for borders. Climate scientists discovered that mountains had played a crucial role in regulating the Earth's temperature. Without high peaks to capture snow and ice, and without the cooling effect of high altitudes, the planet began to warm even faster than before. Weather patterns became increasingly difficult to predict. making farming and planning for the future extremely challenging. Water distribution became a major crisis. Mountain snow and glaciers had provided fresh water to billions of people as they slowly melted throughout the year. Without these natural reservoirs, some regions faced severe droughts, while others dealt with destructive floods from rivers that no longer had mountain slopes to control their flow. Chapter 7: Adaptation and Hope. 2 years after the mountains disappeared, humanity had begun to adapt to the new world. Engineers developed new ways to manage water flow without mountain guidance. They built artificial hills and channels to direct rivers and prevent flooding. Desert areas that had become green were carefully managed to preserve their new ecosystems. Young people who had grown up after the Great Flattening seemed to adapt more easily than their elders. They organized expeditions to explore the vast new plains and discovered hidden wonders that had been buried beneath ancient mountain ranges for millions of years. Archaeological treasures, fossil deposits, and mineral resources that had been impossible to reach were now accessible to scientists and explorers. New forms of art and entertainment emerged. Without mountains to climb, extreme sports enthusiasts created new challenges on the flat earth. They built artificial peaks for climbing and racing, and some of these human-made mountains became as famous as the natural ones had once been. Chapter 8: Learning to Live Flat. As the world settled into its new reality, people realized that the disappearance of mountains had taught humanity important lessons about adaptation and resilience. Communities that had lost everything learned to build again, often creating something better than what they had before. The forced mixing of populations led to new cultural exchanges and innovations that might never have happened if people had remained isolated by mountain barriers. Children born in the post-mountain world knew only flat horizons, but they didn't see this as a loss. They created games and stories about the legendary peaks that their parents described. Some even began building small hills in their backyards, dreaming of what it might have been like to look up at a towering summit. The flat earth was a different world, in many ways harder than before, but also full of new possibilities. Humanity had lost its mountains, but had gained something else. The knowledge that even the most dramatic changes could be survived and that people could find ways to thrive in any landscape. As the sun set over the endless plains where the Himalayas had once stood, it painted the sky in colors that seemed to stretch forever. The mountains were gone, but the human spirit, like the horizon itself, remained unbroken and limitless.